Today's story is about courage, intelligence, and fighting for what's right. It is not just a movie summary, it's a powerful reminder of how two brave men changed the rules of the game. The Banker tells the true story of Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris, two black men in the 1960s who dreamed big. But at that time, their skin color was seen as a problem. They wanted to buy banks and buildings, but the world tried to stop them. Still, they didn't give up. They came up with a smart plan. They trained a white man to act as the face of their business while they worked behind the scenes. It was risky. It was dangerous. But they did it because they believed in fairness. They believed everyone should have a chance to grow, to build, and to own something of their own. This movie is about more than money. It's about justice. It's about standing up when the world tells you to sit down. It's about using your mind and your heart to change the world. So today, let's go into the story of The Banker, a story that still speaks to us, even today. This is the story of two smart and brave men, Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris. It happened in the United States in the 1960s, a time when things were very unfair. Black people could not do many things that white people could do. Even if they were smart or had big dreams, the world did not give them a fair chance. But Bernard and Joe wanted to change that. They wanted to make a better life, not just for themselves, but for their community too. Bernard Garrett grew up in Texas. He was a black man with a big mind. He loved numbers and business. He watched rich people buy land, build buildings, and make money. He wanted to do the same. But when he tried to talk to banks or buy property, he was told no, not because he wasn't good enough, but because he was black. One day, Bernard moved to Los Angeles with his wife and child. He started small. He cleaned buildings. But while cleaning, he watched. He listened. He learned. He saw how business worked. And slowly, he began to make plans. He started buying small properties with the help of his wife. Together, they worked hard and saved money. Then Bernard met Joe Morris. Joe was different from Bernard. He had a loud voice and strong confidence. He owned a nightclub and was already successful. But he wanted to do more. He wanted to do something big. When Bernard and Joe met, they knew they could make a powerful team. Bernard had the brains for numbers and real estate. Joe had the charm and boldness to talk to people. But there was still a big problem. In that time, banks and buildings were mostly owned by white people. They didn't want to sell to black men. Even if Bernard and Joe had the money, people would say no just because of their skin. So they came up with a smart idea. They found a young white man named Matt Steiner. Matt didn't know much about business, but he was willing to learn. Bernard and Joe trained him. They taught him everything: how to talk, how to act, how to make deals. Matt would pretend to be the boss, and Bernard and Joe would stay behind the scenes. It was risky. It was dangerous. If someone found out, they could lose everything. But they were tired of waiting. They were tired of being told they couldn't. So they moved forward. Their first big plan was to buy a large building in downtown Los Angeles. Bernard and Joe taught Matt what to say and do. Matt met with the sellers. He smiled, he talked with confidence, and he made the deal. Behind him, Bernard and Joe made sure every paper, every number, and every detail was perfect. And it worked. They bought the building. This was a big moment. It meant that their idea could really work. It meant that black men could own something big, even if they had to hide to do it. They didn't stop there. They bought more buildings. And every time, they kept quiet while Matt stood in front. But this story is not just about business. It's about dreams. Bernard wanted to do more than make money. He wanted to help other Black people. He saw how hard it was for them to get loans, to buy homes, or start businesses. He wanted to buy a bank. A bank could change lives. A bank could give people a chance. That dream was big, but Bernard believed in it. To do that, they had to go back to Texas. That's where Bernard was from. But Texas was even more racist than California. People there didn't like change, and they didn't like Black men with power. Still, Bernard and Joe believed they could do it. They believed it was time. They found a small bank in Texas that was struggling. Again, Matt acted as the buyer. And again, behind him, Bernard and Joe did all the real work. Slowly, the plan started working. They bought the bank. And with it, they started giving loans to Black people who had been rejected for years. They were not just making money, they were making change. But the more they did, the more people started to notice. Some people began asking questions. Others started getting suspicious. How could a young white man like Matt be so smart so quickly? Who was really behind all this? The risk was growing, and the danger was real. But Bernard and Joe were ready to face it. They had come too far to stop. Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris had done something amazing. They bought buildings in Los Angeles. Then they bought a bank in Texas. And they didn't stop there. They were changing lives, one step at a time. People in their community started to believe again. Black families began getting loans. Small businesses got the help they needed. For the first time, people felt they had a real chance. But not everyone was happy. The system that had always been against them was watching. People started to ask, who is really behind all of this? They looked at Matt Steiner, the white man who stood as the face of the company. He was smart, but not smart enough to do all of this on his own. Suspicion began to grow. Eyes turned toward Bernard and Joe. At first, they tried to keep things quiet. Bernard told Matt to be careful, to follow the plan. Joe warned him not to get emotional or say too much, but Matt was starting to feel the pressure. He was tired of pretending. He wanted to feel like he was really part of the success, not just the front man. That made things harder. Mistakes started to happen. One of the biggest mistakes came when they tried to buy another bank. This time, the deal did not go as planned. Someone found out that Bernard and Joe were the real owners. The truth began to leak out. And once the truth was out, everything began to fall apart. The government stepped in. They said what Bernard and Joe were doing was illegal. They didn't care that the deals were fair. They didn't care that the money was clean. They only cared that Bernard and Joe had hidden the truth. They called it fraud. Bernard tried to explain. He said, "We had no choice. The system was not fair. If we had told the truth, no one would have sold to us. No one would have worked with us. We had to use another face, or we would never get a chance." But the government didn't listen. Bernard and Joe were charged with crimes. They had to go to court. It was a dark time. The men who tried to help their people were now being treated like criminals. During the trial, Bernard stood tall. He told his story with honesty and courage. He said, "All we wanted was fairness. All we wanted was to give our people a chance. If that is wrong, then maybe the system is the real problem." Many people in the courtroom were moved. Some even clapped. But the law was still the law. Bernard and Joe were sentenced to prison. They had to give up everything they worked so hard to build. It was heartbreaking. They lost their buildings. They lost their bank. They lost their freedom. But they never lost their spirit. Even in prison, Bernard kept thinking. He kept learning. He kept dreaming. He knew the fight wasn't over. He believed that one day things would change. Maybe not right away. But someday, because of their story, someone else might get a fair chance. Matt Steiner, the white man they trained, also learned a big lesson. He realized how unfair the world really was. He saw how much Bernard and Joe had risked, not for fame, not for money, but for justice. And he respected them more than ever. Outside of prison, the world slowly started to change. People heard the story. People saw the truth. The story of the banker spread. And it became a symbol of hope, a symbol of strength, a symbol of how two men, with courage and intelligence, stood up against a system that was built to keep them down. They didn't fight with hate. They didn't fight with anger. They fought with their minds. They fought with their hearts. And most of all, they fought with purpose. What Bernard and Joe did was not just about business. It was about breaking walls. It was about opening doors. It was about showing that even in a world full of unfair rules, you can still find a way to rise. Their story tells us that sometimes doing the right thing is hard. Sometimes it costs you everything, but it can also light a fire. A fire that spreads and brings hope to others. Because when you take a stand, you don't just change your life. You help change the world. After the court case, everything changed for Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris. They had built something great, but now they had lost it all. Their names were in the newspapers. People talked about them everywhere. Some said they were criminals. Some said they were heroes. But deep inside, Bernard and Joe knew why they did what they did. They didn't cheat to get rich. They used their minds to break open a system that had kept people like them out for so long. When Bernard was in prison, he had time to think. He thought about his childhood in Texas. He thought about how he had to fight for every small step. And he thought about his dream, not to become rich, but to help others have the same chances that white people had. That dream still lived inside him, even behind bars. Joe, too, did not give up. He had always been the bold one, the man who spoke up and took risks. But even he felt the pain of losing everything. Still, both men believed that what they did mattered. They believed that they had opened a door that others could now walk through. Outside of prison, people began to talk more about what had happened. Many black families who had received loans from Bernard and Joe told their stories. They said, "If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have our home. We wouldn't have our business." These stories helped people understand the truth. Bernard and Joe weren't just businessmen. They were dream builders. Their story even reached Washington, D.C. Leaders and lawmakers started asking questions. Why did two black men have to hide behind a white face just to buy a building or a bank? Why was the system so unfair? Slowly, change began to happen. It was slow, but it was real. Matt Steiner, the white man who had helped them, also grew from the experience. At first, he only joined the plan to make money. But through the journey, he saw the pain and unfairness his friends faced every day. He saw how much harder Bernard and Joe had to work just to be seen as equal. After everything fell apart, Matt didn't walk away. He stood by their side. He told people the truth, that Bernard and Joe had done all the work, and he had only acted as the face. He said they deserved the credit. Back in Texas, Bernard's family stayed strong. His wife, Eunice, never gave up on him. She had helped him from the beginning. She believed in his dream. She raised their children and kept the family together while he was gone. Her strength gave Bernard more power to keep going, even in hard times. When Bernard was released from prison, he didn't stop dreaming. He didn't say, "It's over." He said, "What's next?" That's the kind of man he was. Even after losing so much, he still believed that something good could grow from it. He still believed that young black men and women deserved to have hope. Bernard and Joe's story became more than just their own. It became a lesson for everyone. A lesson that says, if you want change, you have to fight for it. You have to think smart. You have to take risks. And sometimes, you have to stand tall even when the world tries to push you down. Their actions gave people the courage to believe in something better. They showed the world that the color of your skin should never decide the size of your dream. And they proved that one brave move can change many lives. Even though they were punished, they became symbols of power. Not the kind of power that controls others, but the power to lift people up. That's real power. That's the kind of power that stays long after you're gone. Years later, the story of the banker was told again through books, interviews, and finally, this movie. It brought new life to their journey. It reminded people that history is not just made by leaders in suits or men in high offices. Sometimes history is made by people who refuse to accept no as the final answer. The movie helps us see not just what they did, but why they did it. It shows their fear, their faith, their pain, and their pride. It brings us close to their hearts and helps us understand the world they lived in. So many people today still face unfair treatment. They are still told they are not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough. But the story of Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris says something different. It says, you are enough, and you can fight for your place. Their story is not a sad one. It is a brave one. And it is not just history. It is a light for the future. Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris may have lost their buildings and their bank, but they never lost what truly mattered: their dignity, their purpose, and their story. Even after prison, they continued to inspire people. Their actions made many others start to ask important questions. Why does success have a color? Why are some people always told no, even when they have the money, the knowledge, and the plan? The truth is, the system had been built to keep certain people out. But Bernard and Joe found a way in, not to hurt anyone, but to bring justice. They worked harder than anyone. They didn't break the rules to cheat. They used the rules that already existed and simply played the game smarter. Their story teaches us that sometimes the world isn't ready for change. It resists. It pushes back. But change comes anyway, through people who dare to stand up and say, enough. People who take risks not just for themselves, but for others who have been waiting too long for a fair chance. Bernard didn't come out of prison bitter. He came out thoughtful. He still believed in his dream. He still wanted to make a difference. He kept talking to young people. He kept sharing what he learned. He showed them how to use their minds, how to think big, and how to rise, even when life tries to keep you down. Joe Morris was the same. He stayed bold, full of fire. He believed the fight wasn't over. He knew their story had just begun. And through all the pain, all the loss, all the struggle, they never stopped being proud of what they tried to do. Years passed. People slowly began to see the truth. Laws started to change. Banks began to open their doors to more people. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And some of that progress came because of two men who believed in the impossible. The movie The Banker brings all of this to life. It shows how hard it is to dream when the world tells you no. It shows what it's like to work in the shadows while someone else gets the credit. But it also shows the beauty of hope, the strength of courage, and the power of believing in something bigger than yourself. What makes this story so powerful is not just what they did, but why they did it. They didn't want to be rich just to live in a big house. They wanted to give people what they never had: opportunity, dignity, a voice. They wanted the next generation to dream without fear. In today's world, many people still face unfairness. Maybe not in the same way, but the feeling is still there. People are still told they can't, that they're not ready, that someone else is better. That's why Bernard and Joe's story still matters, because it reminds us, never stop dreaming, never stop trying, and never believe the lie that you are less. Their journey was full of risks. They could have failed. And in some ways, they did. But what they gave the world cannot be measured in money or buildings. They gave us a story of strength, a story of two men who believed in their people, in justice, and in the dream that everyone deserves a fair shot. Their story is more than a movie. It's a mirror that shows us who we were and who we can become. It's a call to stand up, to speak out, to build something that lasts. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. The story of The Banker is a deep and emotional journey. It shows us how two men, Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris, used their minds and courage to break the rules of an unfair world. They didn't fight with hate. They fought with strategy, education, and a dream for justice. They wanted to give Black Americans a fair chance, to own property, to grow businesses, to build wealth, and to have hope. Their journey was full of pain, loss, and sacrifice. They were punished for something that should have been celebrated. But even when they lost everything, they gave the world something greater: a voice, a lesson, a light. This story reminds us that real change often starts with just one or two people who are brave enough to believe. Bernard and Joe believed, and their belief changed lives. Even today, their story speaks to those who feel pushed aside. It says, "You matter. Your dreams matter, and you don't have to wait for permission to rise. You just need courage, like Bernard and Joe." So when the world tells you no, remember their story. Remember what they built. And remember, One smart idea, one strong heart, and one brave step can open the doors that once seemed forever locked.